Okay, now we're on the air. Hello, Jen.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Hi. Hi, Frid.
I have the great pleasure and honor to be with the Queen, and I will tell you in a minute why she is the Queen. And she's Jen Storer, a writer of Kitlit, and a teacher, an online course creator, and a businesswoman.
That's right.
She's also the chief inspirationalist at the Duck Pond and at Q&Q Fridays, and we'll tell you all about those in a little bit. You've written so many books, Jen, and unfortunately, I can't get a hold of them because I'm in Germany. I will figure out a way to do this. I want to recommend your books. I want to read them, and I want to recommend them to my students because I think children's literature and young adult literature is so very suited for learners of English of all ages.
Yeah. It's a great entry point, isn't it?
Yes, and I just looked at the sneak peek. I can get the sneak peeks at Amazon, but then when I hit order, they say won't ship to Germany. And not even audiobooks. You know, I thought, okay, I'm going to be smart and order the audiobooks. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you about all of that. But where to start? I don't know. Well, one thing is that you're the queen at the Duck Pond. And
that's right.
the chief inspirationalist. And
yes.
I would love to know how that all came into being.
Okay, well, it goes back, as we were saying off air, you know, these things kind of evolve, so there's no real major turning point. But I think it's about 2013, I decided that I'd really like to teach creative writing to adults. And so I started up a tiny little I called it Circle of Friends, and it was just myself and whoever I could rally, and we would meet above cafes and all little funny places in Melbourne, and I just taught this little course, and that was the course that eventually evolved into Scribbles. But at the time, and Girl and Duck, but at the time, Circle of Friends was just sort of my toe in the water in terms of business. And of course, the thing that I learned very, very quickly was that it wasn't about it wasn't about the product. All that was all fine. It was about the marketing. It was just so hard to get it out there and to find people. Everyone who came and did the course absolutely loved it, but it was just really, really difficult to get it out there. And so I kind of just gave up. After about, I think I did it for about a year, but it just wasn't viable for me. And so I kind of just put it aside and forgot about it for a while. And then a few more years went by, you know, and I started to get a bit more savvy, and there was more stuff coming online, and I was reading more blogs and getting inspired by what other people were doing online. And it just sort of occurred to me that maybe it would be good to take Circle of Friends and do it online. And I think one of the people that really inspired me first was actually Jane Davenport. I don't know if you've ever heard of Jane Davenport. She's an Australian artist. Yeah. She's an Australian artist, and I used to watch her videos. She does a lot of art videos, and I used to think, wow, that's really cool. I think I could do that. And so she got me, watching her videos got me really, really excited about the possibilities. And then from there, of course, I went to B school.
That's where I found you.
That's where we found each other. Yeah.
I just
and that's, you know, the best
Which year did you do B school?
Sorry?
In which year did you do B school?
I think it was 2015, but don't quote me. The years are all kind of splonched together now. I think it was 2015. Yeah,
I did it in 16, and I just read actually of B schoolers and I think you must have been ahead of me, because there was this this page of B schoolers, you know, of graduates, and I just looked at who does B school, and then I discovered a writer and yoga teacher in America and a writer in Australia, and I actually think that Australian English is really suited for Germans, for a variety of that I won't go into. And I also, you know, I had taught some stuff about Australia to my high school students, because we had to do Australia. So I learned, you know, your unofficial hymn, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, so I did all of this, but I've never been there. And
Well, I've never been to Germany either. It's a long way.
Well, we'll bring you over. We'll have to bring
you
over with books.
That'd be fun.
Anyway, so I was interested, and I just thought, oh, this looks interesting what she does. And then I just started following you, and I was intrigued. And I think it's lovely what you have been doing over. I've been following you for 4 years now. Gosh.
Okay. Yeah.
No, three.
Girl and Duck didn't have a name. There's always that big thing about what am I going to name my business.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have a name for it. And I didn't have a logo. I didn't have anything. I just knew that I wanted to teach online. Anyway, I wrote to a very dear friend of mine. He's published in Germany, Gus Gordon. He's an illustrator, Australian illustrator and picture book creator. And so he's in Sydney, and I wrote to him. I said, Gus, I'm going to start up this little creative writing school, but I don't know what to call it. And I don't know what I want for a logo. This is how not to brief an illustrator, right? and I just sent him a photo of a duck that he'd drawn, and I said, but I do know I like this duck. So he said, great, Jen. So he went off, and then a few weeks later he sent me a JPEG. He'd done this little design, and he sent this JPEG, and the JPEG was called Girl and Duck.
Oh, sweet.
And I thought, oh man, that's a gorgeous name for the business. It just stuck. It just became Girl and Duck. And the illustration was beautiful. And of course we use it on all our branding now. And the little girl sitting on the stool reading to the duck, and the duck's looking up really attentively. It's really attentively. It's really, it's kid-lit friendly. It says everything.
Yeah. Love it. Yes.
So that's how Girl and Duck started. And then of course, people took that and ran with it. So then people in the group started calling themselves Duckies. So then we became Duckies, and we have badges, I am a Ducky, and people wear those badges to conferences, and great friendship circles have formed because of this, and identifying with a group of people and having this common, all this stuff in common. Yeah. So it's been really great. So it was all very, very organic, and none of it was contrived. It just all sort of fell into place.
That's how it happens with great ideas, isn't it? They happen in the shower and going for walks and everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
How long have you known that you wanted to be a writer?
I'm not one of those people who started up from childhood. Absolutely not. So I was inspiring. I was raised in the country, in the Mallee, what's called the Mallee in Australia, which is it's a wheat belt, very isolated town in the middle of nowhere, really. And the emphasis in my hometown was on sport, and there was very little emphasis on reading and that sort of stuff. And particularly within my own family, my family of origin were not interested in reading at all. We didn't even have one bookcase. It was just,
oh my God.
Yeah.
Reading was interesting.
Reading was just not something. In fact, reading was kind of, there was always a thought that if you're sitting around reading, you're not really being very useful. Really, you should be, outside chasing a sheep or something. I don't know. So reading, but I did manage to snaffle the odd book. People would give them to me for my birthday. Other kids would give them to me. Or, I went to the local library whenever I could. I didn't know much about writing. I didn't know that authors were even a thing. It was such a remote, But having said that, there was always a little side of me that I just adored Enid Blyton. She was my escape.
I read her when I was a little girl, of course, in German.
The famous five, it was just, that was my happy place. So and in English at school, I was always good at telling stories. I had that thing, but I didn't value it because nobody else did. So it didn't occur to me that was something that I never gave it any thought. Never gave it any. Yeah.
But that's fascinating that you didn't have role models. We always think, it's all about role modeling,
Yes.
So it was in you. You were born with it in a way. Otherwise, you wouldn't have snuck to a library.
It was, and I always see it as being, it was there, but it was kind of latent.
Mm-hmm.
for a long, 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 long time. So then, girls my age, I was born in the 60s. So in the 70s, women either got married and had kids, or they became school teachers, or they became nurses.
Yeah.
So I became a nurse.
Oh.
And so I went nursing when I was about 19. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed in nursing for quite a while, and I got married and all this sort of stuff. But there was always this, the discontent was rising, just rising and rising in me. I knew I was in the wrong place. I knew I was doing the wrong thing with my life, but I just couldn't figure out I was too naive, and I was too caught up in trying to please everybody else to really sit back and think, what's going on here, Jen? And then not long after I had my child, my husband left. To me, it was out of the blue. I had no idea. Yeah. And so I had an 8-month-old baby and no job, and I was in a new city. I'd moved to Brisbane by then. And so that's when that was my big moment of, what are you going to do with the rest of your life?
Wow.
And so, and that's when I started to remember and think about, that's when my spiritual journey really began, but it's also at the same time my creative journey. So I started to think about what do I really want? I started to remember how much I loved writing, and writing little stories at school, and I loved reading and all these sorts of things. And all those long, lonely nights after I'd sort of been left, I started reading again. And slowly, piece by piece, I started, with the help of a therapist, I started to kind of piece my life back together again. And I decided to return to Melbourne, and to enroll in university. So, and do a degree in literature. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's that. And then, of course, that just opened the floodgates to this fascination with poetry and playwriting and screenwriting. I just studied everything that I loved. I didn't do anything practical because I felt like I'd been doing practical stuff all my life and it hadn't got me anywhere. I'd been doing what everybody else wanted me to do. And so when I went to uni as a mature age student, I was just like in a lolly shop.
Oh, yes.
It was just heaven. It was heaven. Yeah.
And then when did you start writing your own little book?
It took me 6 years to do the degree because I had a child. And
yes, of course. And you were probably working as well.
I was on my own. I was working as well. And so it was a 4-year degree, but it took me 6 years. And then just as I was coming out of that degree, just by chance, a friend of a friend of a friend was working in a small publishing house in Melbourne, a boutique publishing house. And she said, why don't you come in and do some work experience? And I thought, oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah.
So I went in there and I rang them up and said who I was, and they said, come in. And I ended up staying and just learning how to be an editor, learning how to project manage. It was a really, really busy, intense publishing house, little publishing house of children's literature. And so then I was right in at the coalface and really just loving every minute of it and just learning so much about the business of writing for children. And firsthand, editing manuscripts, working up series, all those sorts of things. So I was in the best place to learn. And around that time, I started to write my own little stories on the side at weekends and stuff.
Cool.
Yeah. Because I was actually really, while I was at uni, I kind of had my eye on screenwriting. That was sort of where I thought I might go when I graduated. So this children's thing kind of just came from left of field, but I ran with it because it was so much fun.
Yeah. So it just happened, basically.
It just happened.
The story found you.
Yeah.
And then you realize it's a kid or a young adult story.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah.
And is your first story still available, or can I read it, or will you give it to the duckies?
Yeah, my first book is out of print now, but it was just a little 13,000 word. We have this Penguin in Australia had this series called Aussie Nibbles, Aussie Bites and Aussie Chomps.
Oh, how lovely. Nibbles,
Bites. It was a very hugely successful series that ran for years. And a lot of Australian children's authors and illustrators cut their teeth with that series. It was, I think when it closed, it had something like 80 books or something in it, illustrated little readers. So my first book became an Aussie Chomp, and it was called I Hate Sport. Yeah. I got my vengeance. I wrote about a girl who was in a family of sport-loving people and who all she wanted to do was write stories. So, and that got picked up off the slush pile. It wasn't because I was working in publishing that I knew anyone at Penguin. Absolutely not. I was just like any other punter, and I put this in, and it actually got rejected and accepted on the same day. It got
funny.
Rejected by one publisher and accepted by Penguin as well. Yeah.
That's hilarious and fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's everybody's journey in creative writing is always different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how about what about the rights? I mean, because it's out of print now, are you allowed to distribute it yourself?
I've never even thought about that. It's still in all the libraries, and I still get royalties and stuff from it, not like tiny little amounts, but it's still out there in the world. But yeah, I don't think about it much anymore, to tell you the truth. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually written under a pseudonym too. It's not written under Jen Storer. It's written under Prue Storer because it's a long story, but people used to call me Prue. It was kind of a nickname. So my first book was written under that name, and then after that I reverted to my real name.
Wow, cool. Thank you for sharing that. And now when you write, do you have a ritual, or does it just do things just pop and then you just have to stop everything, pop into your mind and you have to stop everything and then write it?
Oh, no, I'm very controlled now how I write. I went through that stage of being awake at night with ideas and not being able to shut down. That went on for many years, but now I'm very focused. And I know what to expect when I come to the page. I know how to plan for a story. I know I can pick a dodgy idea pretty quickly. I'm not easily seduced anymore. Whereas when I was younger and just starting out, it was all the bright, shiny things, and sort of I was much more easily conned by an idea. But now I'm much more circumspect. I'll just pace myself.
Oh, that's interesting. And
that's mainly because I've been under contract for such a long time. So I've had big schedules and big deadlines, and I've had to figure out efficient ways to work. Yeah.
And then while you work, do you do anything? I love to read stories of how writers then inspire themselves. Some have their cup of tea, and some have their chocolate, and some have, just peel an orange or whatever. There's all to get you into it, or are you so?
There's definitely some kind of ritual there. There's definitely the cup of tea and the cleared space, and I a lot of times will light a candle. I like to have a candle around me when I'm creating, so that's just a little thing that I do. And I never write in the evenings. It's always a morning thing for me. So if I miss my morning, I get really cross. If someone interferes with my morning when I'm writing, I lose a lot of time because I'm fresh in the morning, and I'm much more creative in the morning. So that's more. The morning is very precious to me.
It is, yeah. I mean, I want to go back to it, and I actually want to learn to really shut off the phone and to just be gone to the world.
Yeah. You have to. You absolutely have to. Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
But by the same token, you can create under all sorts of circumstances. And so I think a lot of the times we tell ourselves that, oh, everything has to be perfect and everything has to be in place and this has to be right and all that sort of stuff before I can possibly create. But that's actually not true. And anyone who's created with children knows, you know, like I wrote my honours thesis with my son playing the bongo drums beside me. He was 3 or something.
Yes. I did a lot of work in between 10 minutes, in between cooking, you know,
that's right.
Come to a boil and you type a few lines and your kids are playing with Legos. I have 2 boys.
Right, okay, yeah.
And so they're playing and then you do a little bit of work and then they go to bed and you do a little bit of work and so that really helped me. I mean, I don't know whether I would have been effective and efficient at all if I hadn't had children.
Yeah, they do. They force you to focus, don't they? And also, I was good at palming off the kids, you know. You know, like I was always happy for them to go to someone else's place to play, or when they were doing a keto and things like that, I'd be up in the stalls, but I wouldn't be watching, I'd be writing. I'd look up every now and then. I didn't care as long as I was there. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes I'd even sneak off to a cafe while they were doing, you know, whatever sport was the fashion at that time for them. So it was always about making it work for everybody. Mm-hmm. In those early days, Mm-hmm.
So I was going to ask you how the mind of a kidlit author is different from the mind of a regular writer, and actually whether for you there's a difference between a writer and an author.
Wow, great questions. I think that a kidlit author has this gift to be able to re-enter childhood. Mm-hmm. And not everybody can do that. Mm-hmm. And you see that when you work on the other side of the fence in publishing, mm-hmm. and you get people who think, oh, I just write a kid's book to fill in some time, and they might be a journalist or they might be an academic. I've literally seen this. And they send in stuff and they assume that it's going to get published. And because there's this sort of snobbery around, you know, kidlit authors are not the real deal. So you get these manuscripts and they're just like, what are you thinking? How could this possibly be? You're not thinking of your audience, and so definitely there's a different mindset, there's a different talent set, there's a different soul calling, I think, to be able to go in and out. I think it's harder for adult writers to write kidlit than it is for kidlit authors to write for adults.
I bet that's true, and I actually think that good kidlit is the best literature. You know, I'm a huge Winnie the Pooh fan, and I think there is so much wisdom in that. It gives me so much more than many an adult book.
Yeah, and there's so many restrictions on children's literature, so that makes you a better writer. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, because it's not an open playing field. You're keeping your eye on more things. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I remember reading Neil Gaiman's Ocean at the End of the Lane. I really loved that book so much. But I thought, apart from the sex scene, it was almost a kid's book. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've read it.
No, but I just made a mental note to myself that I'm going to.
Yeah, it's an exquisite book, but there's a bit of a reasonably hardcore sex scene in it. But if you edited that out, it's kind of like, it's like a Diana Wynne Jones. You know, it's just this beautiful fantasy about, and it's told through the eyes of the boy, the 7-year-old boy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a fine line. Mm-hmm. It's a fine line. Often. Mm-hmm. Between adult fiction and children's fiction. Mm.
Yeah, I used to read a lot of fiction, and then I somehow stopped because there was so much other stuff to read, and then I started reading grammar books.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't read much fiction at all. People are shocked by that, but I don't have time to read a lot of fiction, and I don't want to pick up other authors' ideas and their voices, and so I pretty much stay clear of fiction, except when I'm really relaxing and unwinding.
But you used to read a lot, right? When you
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I've got to say, I've never read as voraciously as the people that I teach. For me, like a lot of the people that I teach read everything. It's astonishing. They're so well read. But I think there's a point where you need to sort of stop reading and start writing, and start finding out who you are as a creator and what your voice is. I think you can OD on fiction, and I think it's really important to read the best. I think I've written a blog post about that one, once. As long as you've read the best, that's a really great foundation for you. So for me, when I did a degree in literature, there was all sorts of things on offer. Could do grunge fiction and chick lit and all this sort of funky, up to the minute stuff. But I wanted to do something really traditional. So I studied Shakespeare and Milton and all the poets and all that sort of stuff, because I just thought it was really important to understand the best, or why it's the best, why it is. I know that the Western canon's not popular, but I still wanted to know why the Western canon is kind of, why it is so controversial. Why people, what was in... what were they declaring was the best? What was the patriarchy saying, this is the best? Why were they saying that? I didn't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so I wanted to learn, I wanted to know, and then sort of make up my own mind. Does that make sense?
That would be a totally different conversation that I would love to have, because you said, the white canon is a patriarchal canon. And what is good about it, and how is it different from a canon? And, that would be also a lovely post and a whole thing.
Yeah.
I'd love to explore that, because have you come to the conclusion that there is a huge difference between female writing and patriarchal writing, and why, that, but that's
another
big for this, but it's really fascinating.
Yeah. I'd like to look at more of that sort of stuff. Next year I'm taking a sabbatical.
What does that mean?
So I'm taking a whole year off from creative writing. It's all been cleared with my publisher and all that sort of stuff. So I won't be doing any creative writing at all. So for a whole year, because there's a whole lot of other stuff that I want to explore. I've been tied to writing a series. I've just finished the 8th book in a series that I literally started that series in 2003.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And and I haven't been working on it that whole time, but it's been with me since then, and that was the Truly Tan series. So I'm really, really, really excited to now step back and stop writing and start learning again, and start looking at what other kind of writing I might want to do. And so non-fiction for adults really, really is calling me. Really strongly. Yeah. So
but you're not going to take a break from the duck pond, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
I'll put a link to the duck pond. I'm sorry. I'm going to. We don't yet know where we will publish this, but if it's going to be on YouTube, I'll put a link to all of these good things into the description box.
And I'll still have books coming out. So even though I'm on a sabbatical, all the stuff that I've been writing this year will be coming out while I'm on my sabbatical. So to the readers, it won't really seem like anything, but I'll still be kind of around. And but in terms of my daily work and what I'm doing, I'll be focused on other things. And I want to focus on the business. I want to focus on Girl and Duck. I want to grow that. And so it'll be, a really interesting year.
It'll be exciting to watch you and learn from watching you. When did you discover that doodling, drawing, playing, and writing really go hand in hand? It seems so obvious, but not everybody has this idea.
Yeah, they don't, do they? And I think that it was something that I did instinctively. So I didn't know that. I didn't realize that other people didn't play. I just, they didn't give themselves permission to just muck around with words and muck around with stories. And yeah, I didn't realize that people put so much pressure on themselves when it comes to creative writing until I started to teach it. And you know, I reading Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way was just groundbreaking for me, because that opened me up as well to my own creativity, because I realized I could do more, I can play more, I can get a lot more out of this. So so where I had I wasn't scared to have a go, which I found, a lot of people are scared to even, put a toe in the water. They're so intimidated by it. So that's one of the things I talk about in Scribbles. Like, I say to people, because everyone's always asking for rules.
Oh my God.
How do you do this? And what's the proper way to do this? And, what should I do before I start? And all this sort of stuff. And what I say is, you wouldn't say to a child, don't dance until you know some steps.
Unfortunately, some people do, but we sane people know that that's the most horrible thing you can say.
That's an awful thing, isn't it? But imagine, I can't conceive of that.
Oh, and you do so much damage,
Yes.
This happened to my son. He wanted to play the cello.
Yeah.
He grabbed the cello and he hugged it, and then he took the bow and he played the G string. And he said, Mama, listen to this G string. And his new teacher walked in and he said, Lucas, put that bow away. You won't touch that yet for weeks, because we will start with fingers. And that was it for my boy. And so I didn't want it to be true that he could have destroyed his enthusiasm in a minute.
Yeah.
And later, thank goodness, came out by him picking the guitar and then doing it wonderfully. But that was years later, and so much. I mean, you can really destroy something in a minute.
Absolutely.
And we can do that to ourselves.
Yep. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. It's teaching any sort of creativity is really about nurturing rather than teaching.
Yes. And you know what? I find the same about language teaching. The more I teach, I find that language teaching is really teaching people to be children again, because we acquire our mother tongue, in the womb, actually, and we feel it, and then we hear it, and then we actually see it, and then we play with it. And this discovering your organs of speech is just like discovering what you can do for writing, and then having this joy. And we know that kids that play with language with their moms, and are given these precious children's rhymes and children's stories, they become good with language. And it has to be in a loving environment. It has to be nurturing, and it's all spoken language at first, and the children literature that is good is basically spoken language, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. You have to read out. You have to read your stories aloud before you submit them. Yeah.
And then people and the little kids, they want to hear them time and time again. Again is the magic word. You just read it and you say, "Oh, again," and you read it again.
And I don't think we ever lose that. I think we like to think that we do, but I know that I love to. I watch, in terms of film too. I watch films ad nauseum. If I like a film, I just keep watching it. I've watched Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, the extended version, endless times. And the more I know, the more I watch it, the more I love it. Like, I know what's going to happen next. I start saying the words. It's like watching a Shakespeare play. You start reciting the lines before they say them. There's some joy. I don't know what the neurological explanation for it is, but there's a joy in being able to anticipate what's coming next and to say the words. And
I think there we don't need a neurological explanation, if I might say so. Look at nature. There's repetition. We always have spring, and we don't go say spring again. How boring. We rejoice every time all these seasons come around, and the sun goes up comes up in the morning and goes to bed at night. I mean, that's repetition.
Yeah. We're comforted by that, aren't we? By the rhythms of life.
Rhythm and
that's
repetition.
Absolutely true.
And everything we want to do well, we need to repeat. So it's
So it's. I remember reading something about. Do you have Teletubbies over there? Did you have Teletubbies? And
we did, but I never watched them because I was before my kids were born, and while they were little, and I didn't let them watch TV. I know about.
Okay. Yeah. Well, apparently Teletubbies, they used to play the same episode like 5 days in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that they did that was because the little toddlers, they love repetition. Mm-hmm. And so by the end of the week, they knew what was coming. And so they would get really excited because they knew what was coming. And it also gave them a sense of control
mm-hmm.
and a sense of comfort. So, I think I read that on Wikipedia somewhere, because Teletubbies was such a, it was a little bit after my son was little, but I did used to look at it sometimes to try and figure it out because it's so trippy. And they said that, college students used to go home at lunchtime and blow a bong and, and watch Teletubbies. Because it's so trippy. And then that's been replaced by In the Night Garden, which again, and they play with language. Like a lot of people really hate In the Night Garden, but I'm fascinated by it because the way they play with language, it's so absurd and fun.
I have to watch that. I haven't watched it yet.
Again, it just does your head in, but it's that ability to be able to communicate with toddlers and babies. It's a real gift, and it's rare. Not everyone can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and parents can't automatically do it either,
No.
A lot of parents who don't know how to relate to their kids.
Yeah. I was watching a guy in a cafe a while ago, and he was so earnest. He was probably about his late 30s. It was obviously his first child. This little baby, she was sitting up in the pusher, and he was taking her out of the cafe, and he's opening the door in front of the pusher, and he's going to the baby, door.
Oh, God.
And the kid had this look on her face, and she kind of looked across at me and said, what is this guy? Like, seriously, Dad? You can see it in her face. I mean, she was, most of them are old souls. They've been around before. They don't need to be taught door. They're going to pick it up.
And if they do, I mean, they will ask you for it. Like my son my older son actually liked to name things for a while. So he wanted, it was his game with grandma. So he wanted to be picked up by her, and he wanted her to walk through the room with him, and then he would point at things, and then he wanted her to say things. But then she said, "Die tick-tack Uhr, tick-tack," and then she would say a little rhyme or sing a little song. So it was this ritual of we name it and we play with it.
Yeah.
But he controlled it.
Yeah. No, it's gorgeous. It's really
fascinating.
And what I found too, I don't know if you found this with boys, is they go through a stage where they discover jokes. And I don't know if girls do it the same in their language development, because I haven't raised a girl, but
neither have I.
I notice it amongst the mothers of boys, they're into jokes now. They're into knock jokes and riddles, and they just think they're hilarious. And they they're figuring out about wordplay, and it just is, they're just fascinated by it. Yeah. So they're figuring out what they can actually do with language, other than just communicate. They can have all these fun and games with it. So that I found that to be a very distinct stage in their language acquisition. Was this obsession with jokes. You go, I don't want to hear another joke. Have you heard the one about? It's like, okay.
I don't remember being tormented by jokes.
Yeah, I went on for a long time too, probably 2 years at least.
Oh, wow. How many boys do you have?
I have a son, and my partner has a son. So when I met my partner, my son was 10 and his son was 7. And so, they sort of grew up.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, and they get on really, really well. Yeah. So they're 27 and 24 now. Yeah. So they're big boys.
Lovely. So, and do you think that, obviously you had this gift for writing and it was latent. And how do you discover the gift? I mean, usually, people often tell me, oh, I should learn English, or I want to learn English. But really deep down, they don't want to do it because otherwise they would be doing it. They would be finding a way, right? And with writing, sometimes I think I like the idea. I mean, I write grammar books and books on pronunciation, and for a long time I didn't play enough, but I found play in I just loved reading children's books to my kids, so that's where I got my playing in. But I didn't do any role playing with them. That's what they did. I read the stories, and then I got them the little animals and stuff, and they just built castles out of cardboard and all of that. So I didn't play enough, I feel, for a while, because life was so busy and life was stressful. So I had these pockets of joy with my kids when I was reading to them. And then I discovered that actually play jumped in when I was teaching grammar. I teach with colors, and I love playing. And I say, well, we're not going to do a grammar lesson. We're going to play. It's just like playing with the words. And when I do pronunciation drills, I feel it's, like eating the words, or they're yummy, and I really enjoy that. And I like the idea of being able to write a story, but I'm wondering whether I'm just kidding myself about, I wrote this sound alphabet for German and English with animal pictures and colors, and I sort of see these animals playing with the colors, and I would love a story, but I don't even know where to start. So would Scribbles be a good place?
Absolutely. Because I mean, that's what Scribbles is all about. It's not about teaching you. There's a traditional way of teaching creative writing, and there's nothing wrong with it. But everyone has different learning styles, and the traditional way of teaching creative writing is first you learn about character, then you learn about setting, then you learn about plotting, then you learn about everything's broken up into neat sort of chunks. But the thing that's missing in that traditional approach is the play and the freedom to just hop in there and see where it goes. And when you allow things to go places, that's when you really are learning, because you're not in your left brain. You're not sitting there thinking, well, today I'm learning about character. You're just actually you're in the stream, and you're just dealing with things as they come at you. So it's Scribbles is much more about loosening up and letting go of some of those constraints that have been put on us by creative writing teachers. A lot of creative writing teachers, not all of them, but a lot of them, so certainly in a school situation, have never written a novel.
Isn't that awful? Oh God.
Yeah. So they know the theory, which is, it's good, but it's not great.
No, it's like a cook who has never eaten a meal, right?
Yeah.
And he doesn't, and you don't know yumminess. You need to be able to enjoy it and live.
And that's not to say that everybody who writes can teach either.
No,
It's just like everybody who plays the violin can't necessarily teach the violin. So there's push and pull with all of these things. But with Scribbles, that's what I was trying to do, is to help people to relax more and then discover more about their own creativity and what it is that they really want to do in terms of their creative writing, rather than going to it thinking, I want to do, X. Maybe there's something else in there. Because that's also been my experience all the time with stories, is that I go to the page with one thing in mind and then something completely different comes out. So as long as I'm prepared to follow that different thing, then that's when the magic happens.
Now, with language learning, I also feel so much is really intuitive. We're like sponges, and we see all these things and we absorb them. And then we repeat and play, and then we slowly become creative while still absorbing stuff. We always absorb, and then I feel, well, cognition really doesn't have a place in that. We start looking at language through our eyes and with our minds when we are ready perfect users, and when we already are perfectly competent. Kids are perfectly competent orally by the time they start even exploring writing.
Yeah.
Of course, they continue to evolve, but they have the competence already. And in schools in Germany with English, people throw these few words at students, often often the teachers don't speak English well enough, or they aren't comfortable with it, really. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to be at home in it. So they are not at home, that they're forced to speak English, and then they throw these English words at the students, and then they're supposed to create output immediately in English. And so what happens, they use the German matrix and stick these English words in that, and that becomes ingrained in them. And then that's so hard to get out. It's really tragic. So I'm trying to do this, encourage people to simply listen and play on the one hand, and then show them a map of what's out there, and sort of use reason or our cognition as a servant. So look, there's this puzzle piece, and we can play with these puzzles, and you can actually memorize certain things, but then play. And so keep these two things separate, and put more focus on listening and imitation. And I was wondering whether that's also true a little bit for scribbles or for writing, and just like having maybe a little bit of theory, but then really focusing on playing at the same time.
Yeah, what you just said there about listening and imitating too, I think is really important in terms of reading and imitating. So one of the things that I was only talking about it yesterday on a video that I was doing for Q and Chief Friday, which is the question and answers show that I do. There's a lot of, within the children's book industry, there's a lot of obsession with categories, because children's books are divided up into all these different categories. There's baby books, and then there's books for toddlers, and then there's picture books for older readers, and then there's junior fiction, which is massive, for 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and then there's middle grade, and then there's YA. So there's all these categories, and new people coming in tend to get very obsessed with the categories and wanting to know what the rules are for each category. And I was saying yesterday that there's I can honestly say in my entire career as a children's author, I have never, ever, ever, not once thought about the category that I'm writing in. I've always just seen a book. It might be a Roald Dahl book, for instance, and thought, I'd like to write something like that. And then I just sit down and start playing. I don't think about it being for this age or that age, or where it's going to sit on the shelf and it ends up in the bookshop, if it ever does. It's just like, it's imitation for me. That's what it's always been. Imitation and inspiration. And so sometimes I feel like for the ones coming in now, there's actually, sometimes in some ways there's too much information, because it's so easy to get lost in all that stuff and forget that what you really should be doing is just having a go and seeing where it leads you, and letting just, we're not in school anymore. We don't, that's another thing I think that creators have to own it. They have to own their creativity and use it, and not be second guessing themselves, and not be looking for permission or even guidance. Because at the end of the day, you're the one, if you're singing, you're the one who has to open their mouth and make an awful noise. It's the same with writing. You're the one who's going to have to get some really wonky, stupid words down on the page that are not going to look like Neil Gaiman. They're not going to look like Diana.
No, they're going to be awful. That first draft has to be crappy, right?
It has to be, because there's so many moving parts to a story. You can't get them all down in the first round.
That's true for any writing, isn't it? The first draft is crappy.
But yeah, that's right. And also you get better at it the more you do it. And that's another thing where people are impatient with writing, because they can write an email or because they can write a little composition at school. They think it's just another step to writing a novel. They don't realize there's this very long, for most of us, long apprenticeship. And you need some humility. You need to be able to understand that you're not going to be the best, and that the first few things that you write, why should they be published? Why? You know, what if you've just started jogging and suddenly you think you should be in the Olympic team? Why?
That's an analogy that I often draw with learning a language. People, you know, it's when you go to a marathon, to a coach to help you run a marathon. You don't say, okay, teach me how to run a marathon, and heads up, I don't have time to practice. But that's what they do with English, you know, or probably with writing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it's the same in all the arts. I don't know.
In all of life, probably, you know, and kids learn how to walk. I mean, they don't ask us teachers, they watch us, and then they practice, and they practice with so much joy. And they fall down, and they actually get hurt a little bit, and then they get up and do it again, and they find joy again.
The problem is too that, you know, we know what we like. It's that, have you ever seen that Ira Glass video about the gap? So we know what we like, we know where we want to be, but we don't realise there's this enormous gap between where we are now and where we want to be. Now, we've got good taste, we know good books, we can see good literature, we've read lots of it, but just knowing it and being able to spot it and aspiring to it doesn't mean that you're going to get there quickly. There's a gap. And that's where the work comes in. That's where the repetition and the practicing and the messing up. There's no messing up, because every time you do something, you move closer to being the writer that you want to be. But people call it messing up if they don't get it right straight away. But
that's a joyful process, isn't it?
Well, it has to be. It's also the frustrating, frustrating process as well, and it can be very disheartening. But you have to bust through it. There's no way around it. You have to it's like we're saying with music. You've got to pick up the bow and rehearse and practice. There's no way around it. So you can't will it to happen. And there's no golden key. It's not about going to the right conference or reading the right textbook. There's also that sort of, that can be very seductive, can't it, to actually read how-to books and feeling like you're getting somewhere, but really you're just reading a how-to book.
Yeah, but I find that it has to be joyful most of the time. And joyful process, you know, just because something is frustrating doesn't mean that the whole process is frustrating. You know,
that's true.
Like this walking, you know, like I remember my kid falling down and crying, but then most of the time, 90% of the time, he was joyful while he was doing it. Yeah. And so I think we often think that if it's joyful, then it's not work or we're not doing it. So like losing our fear of messing up, enjoying making a mess, like you encourage people to do, and seeing that, it really is the journey. And then maybe we'll be published, and maybe we won't be. And, you know, nowadays, I mean, being published is also a bit still, it doesn't have to be the end goal at all, you know?
No. And I think sometimes if you just let that go for a while, just for a while, it doesn't have to be forever. Just let it go for a while and focus on the craft and learning that, then of course you have a better chance further down the track of being published, because you've done your apprenticeship, you've put in the hours, without that pressure. And ultimately, everything has to be publishable.
Yeah, and ultimately we write for ourselves, I think. And that's even true for nonfiction texts, I think. We write because we want to see it.
Yeah.
And then because we share stuff, I mean, we share common traits, there will be other people who will find it enjoyable.
It's funny, having just written the 8th book in this series, the Truly Tan series. So it's about a little girl she's nearly 10, and she moves from the city to the country and fancies herself as a detective. And in lots of ways, those books are a rewriting of my own childhood. And I kind of was aware of that over the years as I've been writing them, but it wasn't until I wrote the 8th book, just literally finished it 3 weeks ago. I was utterly devastated when I finished that book. I was a mess. And I realized that I was closing this massive chapter in my life, but also that in a way I'd rewritten my own childhood. I'd made up a childhood that I would have really liked to have had.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very therapeutic for me to write all those books and to be re-entering her world once a year for all those years to do that. Mm-hmm. It was psychologically there was some sort of healing going on, I think. Mm-hmm. I knew that it was going to be a big deal when I finished, but I didn't realise how devastated I was going to be. It's just, and when I submitted the book, my publisher got back to me and she said, "Jen, this is really bittersweet. You're going to have to rewrite this." Because it had come through. Mm-hmm. I hadn't, because the books are basically comedy, but because of the mindset that I was in while I wrote this book, there was a much more heavier undertone to it. So I've been rewriting it to lift it, give it that lightness that all the books are renowned for. But I couldn't even. I'd sort of lost touch, I think, because I myself was feeling so bittersweet. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's fascinating. So are you glad she said that? So you agree with her?
Oh yes, I agreed with her after I cried for like days. She counselled me. Publishers, they're so beautiful. I've never come across a publisher that isn't really multifaceted. They just have to deal with so many personalities and so many people and so many problems, and they're just really adept at that human touch. So it was very much like, the doctor is in, like Lucy in Peanuts. So there was a few therapy sessions there where she was, had to sort of talk me down off the cliff. And then once I got through the pain, I could see what she was saying, and I could see how to fix it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine it's like, my older son just moved out, and it's of course the right time. He's a young adult now, and of course I went through a grieving period. And it's not, there's nothing, I mean, and so it should be. I mean, an era has come to a close. Yeah.
Yep.
And so I imagine, this book and the story is your child, and it has become a young adult. And now it's and there's grieving involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Even throughout the story, she kept yapping on about having to go to grade 5. Because she's been in grade 4 the whole time. She's like Lisa Simpson. She's just always going round and round and round. She never gets any older. But in this final book, it is a closure, and there is grade 5 is on the horizon, and everything's changing in her family. Her elder sister's got her first boyfriend, and they're all growing up. So it's very much an end of an era for that family who've been my family. For such a long time, and for me too, because now, and it's like you said, you wouldn't want your son to come home and live at home again. Well, I wouldn't anyway. So it was sad to see them go, but the time was right. They're adults. It's exciting.
It's exciting
for them, and you wouldn't have it any other way. But it doesn't mean that it's not sad, and it's not. It's a bit scary for us too, because then it's like, what's next?
Yes, and it's also scary because they will do things that at first look like mistakes. But when I look back at my life, all the things that other people considered mistakes were no mistakes. They were just necessary steps.
Absolutely.
It was just like it's like life can be like riding in the other way around. You just need to do it and look at it, and then and find your way. And I think it's hard for moms, or at least for me, to think, oh, he's doing something in a way that's not so healthy for him, or he's making it difficult for him, or this or that. And then just to think, all I can do is love him like crazy, and just convey to him that I think he's perfect no matter what he does.
Exactly.
And I trust that he'll find his way, and I can still work on myself so much. There's so much growing I can still do, and there's so much exploration.
Absolutely. And that's another thing I think about too, is that I look at myself and think exactly what you're saying, that I've got so much to get on with now, so much growing and so much learning. Why would I expect a 27-year-old to have it all nailed, have it all figured out?
Yeah.
Like, they have to go through what they have to go through. It's all that's life's journey. You can't buffer them against that.
Mm-hmm.
It would have a detrimental effect on them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's hard, the letting go. Yeah.
Yes, but at the same time, I've always toyed with the idea of taking scribbles, and it wasn't just not the right time, because I've always been so busy, and time is a tricky thing. Somehow, somehow the years go by faster and faster. Really, I mean, it's just insane how 2018 and 2018 has gone. I mean, it's just scary.
I know. Yeah.
And at the same time, I just need to focus on enjoying the moment more. So I'm not sure I'll ever feel like I have time. But next year there will definitely be less, even though they were already quite big, my boys, there was still like some mothering I thought I needed to do. And now they're really, starting December 1st, they're really on their own.
How old are they again? Sorry,
they're 23 and 24, and the 23-year-old just came back from England. He was in England, but he finished his master's, and now he's here and he just applied for a PhD program, got accepted. Yay!
Oh wow, that's so exciting.
Yes, it is. And in Germany, he'll make enough money to live on. They have free programs. So it's basically his PhD will be his job, and he will be paid for that. And it's so lovely.
That's brilliant.
It's brilliant.
It's brilliant.
It
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Yes, and it's just, it's like, it's a perfect, it seems a really nice young professor and a really good team. So I'm so happy for him. So it's very easy to let him go into that, because I think, it's just the perfect set of conditions.
Yeah.
And the other one is starting training where he won't make money so much, but he'll be able to get by. And anyway, but that means I just have my very old dog, but he's, and he actually needs some attention, older dogs need more attention.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. And I have all my projects, but I actually notice that the more I produce, the more I need to feed myself, that I need to play. And and I don't sense yet. I have many books in me still, but I don't see the novel yet, or the kids' book that I dream about. But who knows? I might be able to find a writer who I can inspire. With who can sort of pick up where I can't go yet.
I think a lot of those things too. It's about a pull. You've got to have that real. It's not so much an intellectual thing or even a dream. There's a pull. There's a pull, and when you feel that really strong pull towards something, that's when you really need to start moving towards it, I think. Sometimes, so you can hold these dreams lightly for a long time and just carry them with you until it becomes a pull.
And in the meantime, there are little creative pockets that happen, like you make up funny sentences just on the spur of the moment while you're doing a pronunciation drill, at least. And I enjoy those, so it's a fleeting joy, but it is a precious moment. And so who knows, maybe eventually those moments will become a book, or I will find someone else who will make a book out of it, or it'll just stay a fun pronunciation book. We'll see. But anyway, I will have time for scribbles next year, I think.
That's okay.
Yeah. So did we cover everything? We don't know yet why you are the queen, but did we appoint you?
That was a thing that happened in the duck pond. It wasn't something that I started. They just started calling me that, and then people started to run with it, and so and people give me. I've got books with Queen Elizabeth on them, and I've got mugs with Queen written on it, and I sometimes introduce myself as Queen of the Duck Pond. So it's just been one of those funny things. But it's really interesting. I don't know how much time we've got.
We have as much time as we want to take.
Okay, because because I feel like that I am in the Queen phase. If you look at the fourfold goddess, or it used to be sort of the triple goddess, which was maiden, mother, crone, but now we're talking about this fourfold, and the queen is in between mother and crone. And so I feel like I'm really in that area, I'm in that archetype. So it's really funny that that's kind of really come out in the duck pond. And in Scribbles in the live round, we do a live round once a year. And I think it was the last year's live round. Yeah, we talked a lot about archetypes and archetypal energy and using archetypes for characters and stuff like that. But then we strayed off into this other sort of divine feminine stuff, because that's where I feel really cool these days. So I just think it's a sort of really nice irony that people are calling me the queen when that's the archetype that I really sort of identify with at the moment.
Yeah, wow. Well, yeah. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you great. So much. Really fun. Thank you, Frid.
Thank you, Ruth.
And we'll talk again, no doubt.
I'd love that. I love that.
Yeah. I'll actually be I won't be in Germany, but I'll be over there.
Oh, where?
Next year. So I'm coming over in the end of March. I'm doing a course with Sharon Blackie in Galway in Ireland. So she's a mythologist and writer. And so
lovely.
So it's a sort of I can't remember the name of the course now. I just saw it and thought, I've got to do it. And sort of you walk the land with her, and it talks about, your affinity with the land and Celtic studies and all that sort of stuff. So I'm doing that, and then I'll be tripping around. I'll be staying over there for quite some time.
Oh, so maybe you can come to Germany.
So I might, because I'll be going to Paris because my stepson's living in Paris.
That's 2.5 hours with the train. Please come, Jen.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Jump on the train. You'll come to Aachen. It's this fast train, Thales, 2.5 hours, and you can drink champagne on the way. Please do come. And we'll organize a reading session.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
And can we then somehow get your books over here?
I probably could bring some. I don't know. It's all about rights,
Okay. Yeah, maybe offline you can explain that to me. But
selling rights into other countries is always tricky, and we had a really wonderful French deal and it fell through at the last minute. We had a Brazilian deal and that fell through at the last minute. It's just been one of those things. So it's just...
well, if I can help with any of that, I'd love to make it possible. But we can still have a reading, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yes, please.
All right.
Let's look at that. And then I will stop the recording in a minute. Thank you so much.
All right. And I just realized there's a lot of pink and red in this. I hope it doesn't look...
No, it's good. And you know what? Those are my favorite colors. Pink.
It's so hot here today. It's 32 or something. So it's really, really hot.
Oh, that's right. You guys...
unseasonably hot. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
All right then, Frid. It's been lovely to speak to you.
Thank you so much. And I will see you in Germany.
All right. Bye. Bye-bye.